Greetings from Portugal. My name is Sandra Ribeiro and I'm a lecturer at ISCAP, a School of Accounting and Administration in Porto. My presentation will focus on digital storytelling and how it was incorporated into our master's course in specialized translation and interpreting. Let's begin with an understanding of interpreting. Now, interpreting, seen as the oral transfer of messages between speakers of different languages, is, according to Pastillo, one of the oldest of human activities. When we think that the interpreter listens to what the speaker is saying, then has to quickly understand its meaning and almost immediately say this orally into the language known by the listener, we can understand that the emphasis in interpreting is placed on promptness and the fact that it cannot be repeated nor revised. So, although interpreting may seem like an instinctive shift from one language to another, it is in fact a very complex process which comprises three overlapping phases defined by Elliman as the first step, the auditory perception of what is spoken and the grasp of the meaning. The second step, the dissociation of the meaning from the verbal form. And finally, the third one, an understandable expression or production of the meaning in the target language. Aware of this complexity, we corroborate with Kurtz, who states that interpreting is a high-skill information processing activity composed of interdependent subskills. Now let's consider digital storytelling. The term digital storytelling means using computer-based tools that allow for the digital manipulation of content such as audio, text, or images that are put together to tell stories. The digital storytelling began in California in the 1970s, and the idea was to empower individuals and communities by teaching them how to create their own stories, thus giving them voice. Digital storytelling was originally conceived by the founders, among which we have Joe Lambert, who is now the president of the Center for Digital Storytelling at Berkeley University. And they specify that digital storytelling, according to their model, implies a 2 to 3 minute personal story using the use of graphics, audio, and video. And also important in their conception of digital storytelling are 7 elements. And a digital story should include, if not all, many of these elements. And these are the point of view, dramatic question, emotional content, voice, soundtrack, economy, and pacing. Literature on digital storytelling reveals that there are studies in various contexts that range from business to religion and obviously education. There are several studies that link digital storytelling with reflection in different grade levels in both formal and in informal learning contexts. The case study that I'm going to talk about was implemented in interpreter training course at ISCAP's master program in specialized translation and interpreting that began in 2007. So 15 students enrolled in remote and teleconference interpreting, a course that is part of the master's program, were asked to participate in the research where the focus was primarily to address Elliman's third phase in interpreting, but also to address the visual dilemma that is often referred to when we talk about remote and teleconference interpreting, but this from a creator's perspective. The main objectives were to improve student speaking skills, to apply strategies for overcoming doubts and linguistic weaknesses, but also to exercise speech fluency and to select images considering pragmatics and semiotics essential in remote and teleconference interpreting. Joe Lambert's suggestion focuses on three main areas: the story circle, which the founder considers essential, the story creation, and then its dissemination. The story circle in this case took place in a computer lab and with some adaptations. So instead of sitting in a group circle, students sat at their computers and were asked to audio record all they said from that point on. The first exercise was for students to answer the question, "Who are you?" They were given 2 minutes to speak freely. After this short exercise, students were asked once again the same question, but keywords and expressions were placed on the board at regular intervals, and students had to incorporate this into their discourse, but they had to maintain a coherent and cohesive discourse. So the end result was a 10-minute speech which ended with "Tell me a story." After the story circle, so the second phase, students were asked to consider the story that they had told and then organize it into a 2-minute voiceover for the digital story. This is where the creation process actually began. Special attention had to be given to delivery issues such as tone of voice and pacing, crucial elements in digital stories. Students were also asked to give special attention to the visual aspects of the story and the idea that they wanted to transmit. So they were asked to work collaboratively in order to understand if their own interpretation of the pictures or images they were using were that of their colleagues. So the visual composition of the stories proved to be time-consuming, as many group and whole class discussions arose around these issues. After having all the elements of the story, students were given time and one-to-one support to assemble and edit their final stories. Here, student help was also essential because the students that finished first helped their colleagues who showed more difficulties in manipulating the video editing software. And finally, then we had the story dissemination phase. This phase that we would think would be interesting for the students to finally show their final product proved to be contrary to what we might believe, because students actually did not want to share their stories. So let's now look at the results of this experiment. In order to understand the students' perspective, they were asked to reflect on the various activities carried out, and also registered observation notes were considered. So what we can say from the information that we collected is that all 15 students acknowledged that they actually enjoyed participating in the activities, but they were not expecting such activities in a remote and teleconference interpreting course. They were able to relate to the activities carried out at the end of the creation process. 1/3 of the students mentioned time as a negative factor in various perspectives. This might be explained because class time was scheduled from 9:30 p.m. to 11 p.m. and these students were part-time students that came to class after a full day's work. And so as they initially didn't see the relevance to the work because there was no actual interpreting involved, they felt that they were wasting their time, I would say. But curiously, the same students, towards the end of the activities, when they were completing their stories, they mentioned time was insufficient for the work that they wanted to carry out. And so they said that they didn't complete the work as they wanted to, but what they were able to do given the time constraints. Also, another aspect to refer in terms of results were that students were satisfied, and they mentioned learning on two different levels, on an academic level and on a personal level. Academically, students recognize the manipulation of IC2-related tools, such as the video recording software, image software, video editing software, and this allowed them to maintain a creator's perspective and obtain a deeper understanding of the details and the final outcome. They also mentioned digital literacy issues because, for example, as they used images, we discussed internet copyrights and so on. On a personal level, students stated that the theme, the "Who are you" theme proposed, implied an inner reflection. As one student states, and I quote, "Even if we did not create a very personal digital story such as mine, we must reflect on who we were when we began and who we are now, and the role of our school in that growth," unquote. Now, what is also worth mentioning is the third phase of the workshop in digital storytelling, the story dissemination phase, because in this phase students were very reluctant to share their stories. So we would think that they would want to share the stories that they created, but in fact they stated that they were embarrassed, that some of the stories were politically incorrect or too personal or showed too much. We had one student say that it was not professional, and just to conclude, one student says, and I quote, "The story reveals a part of me I do not want to show many people," unquote. And for these reasons, they were not disclosed, so as to respect the students' wishes. In conclusion, we can say that the study demonstrates that digital storytelling is capable of integrating different literacies and language skills because it combines multimedia researching, production, and presentation skills with traditional activities such as writing and oral production skills. Furthermore, the creation process implies the search for and the selection of materials such as images, photos, soundtracks, and confronts students with copyright issues on the web. We also have the narrative function, which allows students to tell their stories with their own voice, in this case in a controlled environment. So they were able to record and edit their stories as often as they wanted before finally being able to present them to their teachers and colleagues. So they were able to improve their stories until they thought it was how they wanted it to be. In sum, we can say that the digital storytelling process, which includes the story circle, the story creation, and story dissemination, these phases encourage students to engage in a deeper reflection on their learning, academically and personally. And in this case, the use of this theme, also a deeper reflection on their own identities. Thank you. If you have any further questions, or if you would like to contact me, you can email me and we'll talk. Thank you.